Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Defending American interests in the face of Russian, Iranian, and Chinese encroachment in the Western Hemisphere is a key to the Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine. But Venezuela's new interim leader, in her public commentary at least, defends their ties to Russia, Iran, and the PRC, and had said this week had enough of U.S. interference. So beyond the oil leverage, which you talked about in your testimony, what steps is the administration taking to demand from the interim government, to put incentives in place, to ensure that they prevent malign actors, foreign terror organizations, and so forth from continuing to have influence and safe haven in Venezuela?
Yeah, it's I mean, yes, there's leverage, and I wouldn't just say oil. I think anything that's sanctioned in Venezuela, will, in order for them to normalize it, will require cooperation with the United States. But it's not just leverage, it's also their national interest. It's an alignment of their interest. The truth of the matter is that the United States will be a far better partner for a future Venezuelan government that's free and democratic, and even for the current authorities, than some of the partners they've signed up with now. Frankly, we think it's not in Venezuela's interest to have an Iranian presence or the sale of Iranian weaponry or anything like that into their country. So I think there's alignment there. We think and can argue that some of these criminal elements, which they've allowed to act with impunity in parts of their country, is a deal with the devil. In the short term, it provided revenues to some corrupt regime officials, but in the long term has created real destabilization, not for just them, by the way, but also for Colombia. Just understand something. The FARC dissidents and the ELN operate with impunity from Venezuelan territory. They control Venezuelan territory.
Yeah.
And some of that was through deals with individuals aligned with the regime because they made money off of that. But we don't think that's in the long-term interest.
Do they agree?
And what's been expressed to us by leaders of the interim authorities is that they agree. And now we're going to test it.
Despite the public commentary, there's a recognition, you think, and progress.
Look, we all have politics.
Yeah.
Even in places like that. Suffice it to say what I've said from the very beginning, and that is we are going to judge based on actions, not words. And that's going both ways. You can tell us you're going to do all these great things. If you don't do them, you didn't do them. Or you can say, I'm not going to do these great things, but if you do them, you did them.
Good.
And I think we can point to some things now that show you, just as an example. Think about it. Within 2.5 weeks of Maduro's removal, they passed reforms to the hydrocarbon laws, which basically roll back many of the Chavez-era restrictions on private ownership and investment in their country. It doesn't go far enough. It probably needs to do more, but that's extraordinary. That never would have happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. It certainly wouldn't have happened if Maduro was still there. So I think these are signs of progress. Do they still have political prisoners? They do. But many are increasingly being released every single day, and some are actually being released and beginning to speak out again. And we're going to watch very closely how they're treated and how that happens, because that'll be part of how we judge them and their actions.
You
not
touched
words.
on my second question, which is this long history of very sordid history for outside investors coming into Venezuela. And the president and you had a meeting with our energy leaders in the Oval Office to talk about the opportunity to invest. And there was, worries about the safety of investing. What steps beyond what you just described in terms of the hydrocarbon law, security guarantees for workers, any sorts of certainty that investors are gaining, which is going to allow them to have the confidence to move on the opportunities of Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is some of these investors or potential investors need to get a license from OFAC to be able to even explore this. Then they need to be able to go down there and meet with people and see what's happening and make that determination. Here's what I would say. Venezuela has a lot of oil. They do. But there's a lot of oil in other places too. Companies are only going to invest somewhere if they know we're going to invest, we're going to make our money back with a profit, and our land isn't going to be taken from us. And if you try to, there's a court we can go to and contracts we can enforce. That's the level of certainty that we're talking in terms of security. And that's part of this transition process. That's part of this recovery process, is to normalize their industry. Because if not, they'll just invest the money in Guyana, or they'll just invest the money in some other part of the world that has oil. They're not going to risk it. So it's to their benefit to have set up a normal, transparent process that encourages foreign investment, not just in oil, by the way, and other natural resources, but in other sectors of their economy. I mean, it's unlimited, whether it's retail, whether it's banking. I mean, a country that's prosperous and generating economic activity holds the promise of all sorts of economic activity.
Let me try to squeeze in one more question, if I could, just in my remaining seconds, just very briefly. We've heard such differing accounts, and the president has spoken strongly, you have as well, on the deaths in Iran and the horrible atrocities that are being committed. Can you give us some sense of, we see reports of thousands, tens of thousands. What's the State Department's best estimate of what's happened on the ground?
Well, in the thousands for certain. And look, I think regimes, including that one in Iran, have learned that when you start shooting people in the head with snipers, it's effective. I mean, it works, and they've done it, and it's horrifying. And that's what we've seen. That regime is probably weaker than it has ever been. And the core problem they face, unlike the protests you saw in the past on some other topics, is that they don't have a way to address the core complaints of the protesters, which is that their economy's in collapse. And the reason why there's economies in collapse is because they spend all their money and all their resources building weapons and sponsoring terrorist groups around the world instead of reinvesting it back into their society. And as a result, have taken on massive global sanctions, which has isolated their economy and their country. And so that's what the Iranian people are demanding, is that they stop doing that and start caring about them and get these sanctions off them. And this regime is unwilling to do it. So the core challenge is the protests may have ebbed, but they will spark up again in the future, because this regime, unless they are willing to change and or leave, have no way of addressing the legitimate and consistent complaints of the people of Iran who deserve better.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.